On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, Russian President Vladimir Putin set to pay Saudi Arabia a visit. Expectations on the trip? And HKEX drops its takeover bid for the London Stock Exchange. What does it mean for Asia's financial hub? And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. We begin today's show in the Middle East. The United States has been deeply involved in the region for years, but this year it has stepped back with the pullout of U.S. troops from Syria. Meanwhile, another major player in the region, Russia, is apparently expanding its influence in the area with deepening ties to other regional players such as Iran, Turkey, and even Saudi Arabia. Before we get down to a discussion about what does the latest mean to all of us, let's take a look at this.
Is Russia widening its footprint in the Middle East? According to an RT News report, Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to visit Saudi Arabia in October. Oil prices and a number of business and investment agreements will be discussed during his trip. Last month, two major Saudi oil refineries were attacked by the Yemeni Houthi-led Ansarullah movement, resulting in rising oil prices and supply concerns globally. The attack also brought into question the efficiency of the costly U.S.-made Patriot missile defense system, though U.S.-Saudi relations have traditionally been strong. At this critical time, President Putin held out an olive branch to provide assistance to Saudi Arabia after Turkey purchased Russia's S-400 missile system, while Iran bought the S-300. Both Iran and Russia are suffering from U.S. economic sanctions. They are working together to ditch the dollar to weaken the effects of sanctions. The two countries are also allies on Syrian issues. In September, the leaders of Russia, Iran, and Turkey made a joint announcement about a committee being formed to rewrite Syria's constitution as part of a political solution to the country's 8-year war. But on Wednesday, Turkey launched a military operation against Kurdish fighters in northeast Syria. For its part, Russia supports a dialogue between Damascus and Syria's Kurds. Earlier this year, the Trump administration abruptly withdrew U.S. troops from Syria. Many said it paved the way for deeper Russian presence in the war-ravaged region. Has Russia indeed broadened its influence in Middle East affairs?
For more on the Middle East diplomacy, we are joined in Moscow by Alexei Kolebnikov, who is a Middle East expert at the Russian International Affairs Council. Sir, welcome to the program. Meanwhile, joining us in Washington, D.C., we are inviting Abbas Khatem, a resident senior fellow from the Middle East program of the Atlantic Council. Welcome as well. Last but not least, in our Beijing studio, Li Guofu, director of the Center for Middle East Studies, China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. So let's start from the visit likely to be made by Russian president to the region. Now, this is going to be one of those very rare visits and exchanges at the highest level between the two sides. Now, would you like to help us understand, Mr. Kolebnikov, what's likely to be on the agenda?
Well, in the first place, this is kind of an reciprocal visit of President Putin after historical visit of Saudi king back in 2017 to Moscow. So agenda is pretty much quite broad, but still lacks the content, although Russia tries to fill in the missing space with different projects. And I would say the major focus will be in energy sphere, which is coordination of oil output in oil production and oil prices. Then, of course, it is investments. A Russian fund of direct investments have already quite a lot of agreements with Saudi sovereign wealth fund, and they expect to sign even more agreements worth over $2 billion. And most likely, I mean, definitely the countries will discuss, the leaders will discuss the situation in the Gulf and tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran and situation in Syria. Also, following the recent attack on the Saudi oil facilities, the military technical cooperation is also expected to be on the agenda, as Russia has to offer its own products which could in the future be helpful to address such attacks.
Mr. Kolebnikov keep on emphasizing on the possible roles that Russia is likely to take on in the near future in the region. Mr. Katyan, of course, that sounds not that pleasant to the ears of Washington, even though Washington under this administration has decided to withdraw its troops from Syria.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat that, please?
The question is, how does Washington feel about Moscow filling in the vacuum some believe left out by Washington?
Well, thank you. The vacuum in Syria that is left by the U.S. administration is intentional. President Trump already has made his intentions clear that he doesn't want to keep troops in places where he doesn't see any necessity for them. There are people in the United States, especially in the U.S. Congress, and critics of the president who are dissatisfied with this decision, and they feel that it is serving the U.S. competitors, especially Russia. So we do have a split U.S. government on this, and I think that ultimately what the president intends and wants to do will be the course of action by the United States.
I see. Mr. Kolebnikov, I want to come back to you and clarify several important things before I go to the Chinese guest for a different view. Mr. Kolebnikov, for example, about the situation in the Middle East. Now, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates recently do not necessarily agree as much as they did on the issue, for example, about Yemen. And therefore, what do you think Moscow would come in and what role it will come in this regard?
Well, Russia tries for the last years to market itself as a broker rather than side itself with one or another party. A good example is a recent and continuous Saudi-Qatar rift. In this situation, Moscow doesn't back or doesn't side with any country, but tries to keep working relations with both actors. So in the situation of any tensions between Saudi Arabia and UAE on Yemen, I don't expect that Moscow will pick sides, and it will just continue its politics of being an so to say, an honest broker and keeping all channels of communication open with all parties involved.
Now, as an honest broker, that was said by our Russian guest, Mr. Li, to what extent the powers in the region have a choice of who will be the middleman, or as a piece, or shall we say, a trustable broker? To what extent they will need to really rely on Russia and Moscow to be the go-betweener, and at least to make things not escalate when it comes to tensions, Mr. Li?
I think it is very hard to say at this moment, because the general impression of the region is that the Americans, as our guests say, that especially the Trump administration, that the people to feel that the Americans were leaving this region, and for this scare a lot of American airlines, and because before they would depend on Americans' protections against the threats from outside. And since the Russia has gained its credibility in supporting or gaining the Syrian President Bashar Assad in power, and also Russia, and also gain and make a lot of friends, I think, in the region. So these regional airlines try to shift a little bit of its relations to improve with Russia. So we can see that to some extent, Americans left the power vacuum, which the Russia would fill in. But Russia itself making its efforts, try to replace some of these political or power vacuum left by the U.S.
Well, S-300 and S-400, Mr. Katim, that was the air defense systems that Russia sold to the region, some of the biggest powers in the region. What does that mean for Washington? And as a result, is there likely to be reactions coming from Washington in real term?
Well, there are two concerns here. One of them, of course, is that the United States, as a manufacturer of air defense systems, would like to see their U.S. weapons to be sold to clients and customers in the region. There is an extra point the United States has made, particularly with Turkey, because Turkey is a NATO member and an ally of the United States, and the U.S. raised the issue of compatibility of this defense system with what is being used by the NATO system, and that had been an issue of dispute, if we recall, between the United States and Turkey, to the point of giving them an ultimatum. So these are the two really concerns from the U.S. perspective, and that is part of the market competition, but also some logistical situations with countries that need to be compatible with U.S. Weapon and military capability systems.
Mr. Kolebnikov, of course, military and also weapon sales is nothing like ordinary trade. This would mean more than just dollar-wise. It is much more about strategic influence in the region. So how does Moscow, with the success of the recent deals of air defense systems being sold in the region, feel about its potential?
Well, I wouldn't exaggerate the meaning of the S-400 sale, and I would say that it has more political message and significance rather than in military terms. It's just more as a signal that traditional U.S. partners in the region, like Turkey, Egypt, ready to consider alternatives and purchase Russian weapons. So basically, the same situation might happen with Saudi Arabia, with UAE in the future. UAE has already been buying some Russian arms. So this is more about representing an alternative, because for the local actors like Egypt, Turkey is the best example, that Turkey uses Russia and its deals with Russia as a bargaining chip to get a best deal or to get a best offer from the United States. So in this situation, Russia kind of allows its partners in the region feel more or less free in terms of maneuver. So, and I think that is what appreciated by Turkey, especially with regard to S-400 purchase.
Yeah. Mr. Lee, now we are talking about several paradigms when it comes to the shifts in the region. First of all, is the U.S. role in the region receding rather than increasing? Secondly, it's the competition among the regional players, some of the countries were already mentioned. And thirdly, it's about what this region might mean to the rest of the world, and what would that mean to Russia as a result of that. What do you make of these various paradigms all shifting at the same time to Russia, an opportunity or a challenge?
I think both are provided as challenges and opportunities, because everyone believes that currently the whole region is under the period of transition and the change of balance and in the region. So the used to be the airlines not became the full, and like some new players more active like Russia. Some people say that Russia is coming to the Middle East once again. Now we see that Russia's influence or its role in the region is even bigger, and try to, some people say that to replace the role used to act by the United States. This is something, it depends, because I personally, I don't believe that the Americans would leave this region because this region is so important for the American interests.
Mr. Kolebnikov, any reference that Russia had earlier in history that would provide confidence about becoming a go-betweener among the very different interests that you see among the regional players at the Middle East right now?
That's one of the main priorities of Russia, how it tries to promote in the Middle East. I mean, I also want to, for a second, to come back to the previous question.
Please do.
I don't think that even Moscow perceives U.S. Kind of declining role. If you actually look at the Middle East in broader terms, U.S. presence in the region didn't change much. The status quo is not changing. U.S. is still the biggest partner of all its traditional allies in the Middle East. And Moscow just uses an opportunity which opens with the situation. But in a larger scale, I don't see that Russia has any ambitions or even capacities to challenge or even will to replace the United States or take over its role in the region, because that goes and comes with additional responsibilities, economic burden, and etc.
Okay, Mr.
Kolebnikov
certainly is talking with
as an intermediary. That's
certainly you're talking about with quite some strategic modesty, shall I say, in your answer. Mr. Katim, I know you're busy with your email, but I'm sure you overheard your colleague as well about the Russian attitude. Do you think Washington buy that?
Well, again, Washington always is skeptic about what the Russians are doing. And that is, you know, the kind of nature of the relations. But I believe that these issues have to be considered at face value. So it's, you know, the competition will continue.
Okay. So another question, Mr. Kolebnikov, is about oil. Of course, both Saudi Arabia and Russia are big oil countries, and the OPEC Plus is about really the traditional oil countries plus Russia. How much of an alliance Russia could become with Saudi Arabia on that? Bear in mind the fact that for the moment, it is mainly about competition.
Well, if we look back in 2014-15, when oil prices significantly dropped, that actually was one of the main factors which drove Russia and Saudi Arabia together, and their relations started to improve. That's one of the things in common interests which they have. Because if you look at Russia-Saudi relations, they have pretty much a lot of disagreements on Syria, on Iran, on regional security architecture, on U.S. policy in the region. The list is quite long. But what is more important, that the two countries managed to agree to disagree, but also to focus more on things that have in common. And interest in energy sphere, in oil, which is crucial for both economies, for Russian and for Saudis. And this is why they managed to overcome all obstacles and create this format. And I think that this format will continue to exist, probably with some adjustments, but I think it's here to stay.
Mr. Lee, your thought?
I think, you know, both countries, they have, as our Russian guests said, you know, there are some areas they disagree, but some areas they have been agree. But things, you know, has changed a lot in the recent years, because you see that, you know, the relation between the two countries has steadily improved, and you know, both sides now hope, you know, the coming visits of the Russian President Putin will set a new stage and raise, you know, the relations between the two countries to a new high historical levels. And some people expected more than 30, and agreements or contracts would be signed, and also include some, the memorandums, and both involve in, the energy sectors, the commercial sectors, as well as some, maybe military areas.
Gentlemen, before we go, I would love to hear your thoughts, because things are changing very fast in the Middle East. That's not an exaggeration to begin with. So what are likely to be the competitive edge that we are talking about and we should focus our attention on, whether it's about the regional powers or it's about Russia or the United States or others, that's likely to make the biggest impact in the region? What do you think is that the competitive edge? What shall we focus our attention on? And Mr. Katim, you want to go first?
Yes, I think right now the Middle East is in turmoil. So there is, I think the greatest concern for all of the international powers should be focused on bringing back stability to the region. Most of the countries right now are either war-torn, or conflict is prevailing, or sometimes you see even the countries that look stable from the outside, nobody knows what's brewing under the table. So I think we cannot talk about any terms of competition in a volatile area like this. What could the U.S. or Russia or even China, for that matter, gain from a place like Syria or Iraq or Libya or all of the other places, or Sudan, unless you really first bring back stability? Then you talk about
stability is the key word.
Political,
okay, got it. Mr. Kolebnikov, what do you think? 30 seconds.
Well, in the first place, the entire region is in its grand transformation stage nowadays. And if we're talking about the role of global powers, if we look back for the last century even more, the region was dominated by presence of external powers, and it didn't bring any positive results. So this is why today the major focus should be done, and is already started to be done, on regional powers. The role of regional powers like Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia started to grow. This is to say that they should take more responsibility to their region, and the role of external powers inevitably should decline. Basically,
regional powers, that's the key word. It seems that you want to emphasize. Mr. Lee, 30 seconds as well.
I think, the moment, as our guest said, that the Middle East is under the change of, the balance, change of the balance, and both, outside the big powers and also the regional powers. As for the key words in this region, I would say that, the region needs cooperation, but the current today is the competition is more prevailing.
Okay, whether it's a competition or cooperation, we have very different views. Mr. Katim talk about what about stability, Mr. Kolebnikov talk about what about regional powers, and Mr. Lee, of course, competition or cooperation. Well, we'll find out those answers as time goes by. Unfortunately, gentlemen, thank you so much. Our time is running out. Alexei Kolebnikov, Abbas, Katim, Li Guofu, thank you so much. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Still to come on the program. Hong Kong Stock Exchange drops its takeover bid for the London Stock Exchange. What does it mean for Asia's financial hub? We'll ask that to our panelists right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Next, we turn to Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange said on Tuesday it had withdrawn a $39 billion proposal to the London Stock Exchange Group to combine the two together. But it still believes that the combination is strategically compelling. The failure of the bold move leaves open the question of what the Hong Kong Stock Exchange might try next to carry out a strategy of being China-anchored and globally connected. Take a look.
Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited announced on Tuesday It would draw up an offer for the London Stock Exchange Group. HKEX Chief Executive Charles Lee said dropping the bid was a disappointment, but it's a rational decision in the interest of its shareholders. HKEX made a $39 billion takeover bid for the LSEG on September 11. The London Bourse rejected the proposal. The LSEG has long sought to bolster its presence in Asia and launch a link scheme with HKEX's competitor in Shanghai because it values the mutually beneficial partnership with the Shanghai Stock Exchange, which is their preferred and direct channel to access the many opportunities with China. The surprise bid comes amid political turmoil engulfing Hong Kong. In the 2019 Global Competitiveness Report, recently published by the World Economic Forum, Hong Kong is ranked third globally among 141 economies, up 4 places from last year. But the rankings were determined before the escalation of tensions in the region. So, what's in store for equity markets in the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong? What's the future hub for Asian finance?
So what does the withdrawal of Hong Kong exchange bid for London Stock Exchange tell us? What's the real score in Hong Kong? We're joined by Ronald Wan, the CEO of Partners Financial Holdings Limited. Meanwhile, we're joined in Beijing by Mr. Zhang Gong, who is also a professor at the University of International Business and Economics. And at the same time in London, we have Mr. John Ross, a senior fellow with the Chongyang Institute of Renmin University. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to go to you first, Mr. Wan. What does the withdrawal of the earlier proposal mean to Hong Kong Stock Exchange?
I think it is a very disappointing move, but still it is expectable because I think the timing of this bid is really bad, given the situation in UK and given the situation in Hong Kong. UK is having its Brexit, and the shareholders of the London Stock Exchange don't think the current valuation is a very feasible one. For the situation in Hong Kong is that Hong Kong tried to enhance its international competitiveness and also enhance its status as the international financial center of China. So, given the bid, being ended, it means that the Hong Kong competitiveness and Hong Kong internationalism and everything will meet some setback, for the time being. Also, I think for Hong Kong people and for Hong Kong Stock Exchange, how to work out a better future, for the London Stock, for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange shareholders and for China, I think it is still working out. These things is really disappointing for the time being. Yes.
I understand. Professor Gong, your take.
Well, I think this bid was not very welcome at the very beginning. I mean, 2 days after this proposal was made to the London Stock Exchange, the management of LSE put out a very negative report, essentially rejecting this bid, not so much out of the price that it was taken to the exchange, but very much based on a couple of sort of more fundamental reasons. For example, it mentions the regulatory hurdles that have to go through. It questions the validity of the synergies of merging them together, and a couple of other reasons. So I think the management of the company just doesn't like this idea, and on top of this, we have this very unfortunate situation going on in Hong Kong. So I think this deal is pretty much there now.
I see. Mr. Ross, of course, you have also been working for the Economic Policy Office of the Mayor of London's office. So you probably could help us understand better about whether Hong Kong Stock Exchange, if in the future see another opportunity, still have a chance with the London Stock Exchange at all.
Yes, well, I was very directly, as the Mayor's Director of Economic and Business Policy, involved in a previous attempt to take over the London Stock Exchange. That was by the US NASDAQ. You have to understand the position of London Stock Exchange. Although it's called London, its real significance is as an international stock exchange. A large part of the companies which are listed there are in fact international companies. Indeed, that was London's key strategic advantage, which is there are a number of companies that, for regulatory reasons or reasons concerned with US foreign policy, don't want to list in New York, but they want to become linked to an advanced country's stock exchange. London was ideal for that. It, for a period, had a larger number of IPOs from, for example, China than did the New York Stock Exchange. This advantage is even stronger now because concern about listing in the US is becoming much wider. Therefore, in a certain strategic sense, the link up with Hong Kong was very logical from the point of view of London. I think the obstacle that was raised on the London side is really a political one. The London Stock Exchange saw itself linking up with European stock exchanges, such as the Deutsche Börse or Italian Stock Exchange, which it took over. So I think there was a strong political pressure that was also involved with the London Stock Exchange not going along with Hong Kong. That's in addition to, obviously, the negative effects of the rioting that's going on at the moment.
Right. I'll go to the other two guests, one in Beijing and one in Hong Kong. Professor Gong, so do you think the latest move and drama, in a way, gives us much hint about where the rest of the world sees Hong Kong compared to where Hong Kong sees itself?
Well, I think Hong Kong will still remain as a hub for raising funds, at least in Asia, and also potentially internationally. Charlie Lee's offer to the LSE is very much premised upon the idea of creating a global stock exchange. He already owns the London Mercantile Exchange, and his bid is to essentially integrate the two exchanges together. In other words, offering a global platform across different currencies across different countries, and it's creating a global market. And also, this bid is conditioned upon the LSE giving up this acquisition bid of another company owned by Reuters.
So your point is what?
The point is that he is trying to create a global exchange. So this is pretty much a setback for him. But from Hong Kong's perspective, it's still a very much a vibrant place to raise funds, and it's a financial center, at least for Asia. So I think that role is not going to go away. Even right now we're seeing a temporary setback for his effort to go even more.
Mr. Van, of course, Hong Kong for a long time, and rightly so, have been considering itself as the place for the link between China and the rest of the world, and also the financial center in Asia. Now, of course, things have changed. Whether it is for better or for worse for different localities is one question, but how to have a clear assessment of the current status of Hong Kong vis-a-vis others' perceptions about Hong Kong. Do you think the latest drama provide any kinds of hint to elites in Hong Kong and also to policymakers in Hong Kong?
Well, frankly speaking, I think the current situation in Hong Kong give investors and give not just in Asia, not just over the world, have a new perception of Hong Kong, possibly on the negative side, and well, what is Hong Kong can do, what Hong Kong can do in the future is to maintain its competitiveness and maintain its openness. I think the key survival and for Hong Kong in the future basically is for it maintain a key international financial center of China. Hong Kong needs China because Hong Kong is the international hub for China, and also it is the only city in China without currency control, with free flow of capital, and basically it still has its competitiveness. But still, we are facing a lot of competitions from Shanghai, Shenzhen, they are opening up as well. So I think how to shape up and how to enhance the competitiveness, how to put things on a more balanced, scenario. I think this is something which Hong Kong need to work out, and things are really challenging for the time being. I think the government, SAR government, and central government can work out something for Hong Kong and for the Greater Bay Area. How to create a synergy impact and make the market bigger for Hong Kong and make the Hong Kong competitiveness better. And I think this is something which we need to work on to help Hong Kong.
It's very interesting, Professor Gong, because one has to help itself. In order to be strong. There's something that others could do in order to support, but nobody can determine the fate of one place or another without enough impetus from within that territory. So, Professor Gong, to what extent do you think the latest in Hong Kong mean for the competition earlier already seen among the different stock exchanges in Greater China, not to mention in Asia? Not to forget, we also have Japan and Singapore, extremely active.
Well, I think Hong Kong still differentiates significantly from stock exchanges in Shanghai and in Shenzhen. It's an international market. Its currency is, its international currency is really convertible.
You said it already.
Yeah. So these are the things that are going to last some time. The advantage is going to last some time. Now, in terms of the question you raised about the Hong Kong government, Hong Kong people resolve their own issues, I think this is, as you said, I mean, this is an issue that they have to work out themselves. There's only so much that the central government can do, and also the central government is also constrained by our arrangement with Hong Kong that this is one country, two systems. Right. So my expectation is that in the next few weeks or so, the SAR government needs to put things together and resolutely resolve the current turmoil in Hong Kong. At least the violence have to be off the streets. You cannot let people off the hook.
Mr. Wan, we understand the chief executive and her office is likely to provide the governance report coming up in the next week. Of course, people are expecting what's likely to be the details, but even the chief executive and her office is working in the right direction. Would different parties, I'm not meaning political parties, but rather different beliefs in Hong Kong will be able to reconcile among themselves? I guess that's probably is a bigger question than just listening to what the chief executive has to say.
Yes, I agree. I think every segment in the society need to reach a compromise and need to have confidence in the government, and also to work out a solution what Hong Kong can deliver to the country and to the world. So basically, I think the government will work on something. They are going to make an announcement on next Wednesday. Government policy plan. How to enhance the society and the stock exchange as well. I think the only survival way and for Hong Kong to remain to maintain its competitiveness is to increase its communication with mainland and to try to exchange the various connection schemes with capital centers in China, so that everyone in China, when they want to connect to the world, they can use Hong Kong as a gateway and as a platform. I think this gateway and this platform need to be enhanced and need to be strengthened in her policy plan to Hong Kong people and to people in the country.
There are already a lot of things going on from the mainland to support Hong Kong. Of course, at this point, it is very hard to convince investors to go there even further given the latest situation. But Mr. Ross, I know you're still online with us. So what do you make of the latest situation? What would it take for Hong Kong to really bring out its competitive edge following the fail of takeover of the London Stock Exchange? Of course, it's only a proposal at this moment.
Well, I think the crucial thing is that Hong Kong has got to situate itself firmly as a part of China, as the key financial gateway which is in between China and the world. Incidentally, strategically, I think that will happen more. I personally believe that Chinese companies made a mistake in listing on the New York Stock Exchange. I wrote this at the time. because I think the actions of the US against very large companies such as Alibaba and Chinese companies will increase. Alibaba was already recently looking to find a way, what you might call a sort of partial listing in Hong Kong. And I think there will be a tendency for Chinese companies to reallocate themselves into Hong Kong. So the real strategic way forward for Hong Kong, because no other exchange can have that advantage, is to see itself very firmly situated with China.
Okay. John Ross, John Gong, round one. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for the three of you joining us. Really appreciate it. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.